right. So, welcome everyone. I'm Shah, also known as Kink, and today I'm honored and privileged to interview Viola Johnson, the mom, grandma, and now great-grandma of several generations of leather men and women, and therefore affectionately answers to the name of Mama Vi. She is the wife of 48 years to the first Black international Miss Leather. She is one of the 8 original Onyx Pearls. The Onyx Pearl is a nonprofit organization for women of color who are practitioners of leather, BDSM, kink, and fetish lifestyles. Senior griot and director and founder of the Carter Johnson Library. The library brings history to the community it serves and houses compilations of over 15,000 books, periodicals, posters, arts, newsletters, and ephemera, documenting the history of SM, leather, and kink. Mama Vi previously served on the board of directors of the Leather Archives and Museum and currently serves on the board of directors of the Leather Hall of Fame. She is a charter member of the Tulsa Uniform Leather Seekers Association and the Lesbian Sex Mafia. She has received numerous honors and awards, such as the 2020 Race Banon Advocacy Award, the 2019 Forbearer Award from Tri-State Leather, and the 2018 Leathertarian Lifetime Achievement Award, to name a few. There are many more. She is a beloved community leader, an advocate known for her dedication to nurturing and empowering individuals of all ages with a warm heart, unwavering commitment to service, and a prolific storyteller. Mama Vi has spent decades fostering community development, supporting education, and mentoring youth. Her wisdom, compassion, and relentless drive have made her a cherished figure in the lives of many. My leather mentor requested that I interview a leather person I respected and find out their why and how this person uses leather to show up for their community. This bio speaks for itself and is just humbling to be here with you today, Mama Vi. Welcome. Thank you.
You. Thank you. In
Absolutely.
all seriousness, being able to look at my next generation and see the work you're doing, yeah.
Thank you. Don't do that, Mama, because I'm a crier too. So please. I
The
will.
gratitude, baby girl, goes both ways.
Yeah.
You guarantee that I begin to pay off a debt. And put a pin in that because I'll tell you about that debt a little later.
Okay. Okay. I'll add that to my notes
Put a
here.
pin in that.
Thank you. So let's just jump right in. And so the first question is, tell me your story. I want to start at the beginning. Like, how did you get introduced to leather, the kink community fetish? How did it all begin? How did you end up here?
Once upon a time when dinosaurs roamed the earth and God was a very young child. Um, Actually, let me preface this because it's been 50 some odd years and it's a little hard to imagine just how painfully straight I was.
Oh.
If you're only as sick as your secrets, yes, I was a debutante. National chairman youth for Nixon Agnew. I sang with Up with People. Now, the last of those are something I'm still very proud of, and I believe in the words I sang. But does that tell you just how far to the right I was? Went off to college and then to graduate school, and the state of New Jersey decided to give me a scholarship for my master's degree in housing, student personnel,
Oh.
with a hidden agenda I didn't know about. And the hidden agenda was that I was to keep one woman, one student at the time, out of the hair of the Dean of Women, the Dean of Students, and the President of Montclair State University. That woman was Jill Carter.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And as our relationship grew as employee and employer, because Jill worked for me, we got to know each other, and the rest of that is a little bit of history. But Jill had a fantasy, and I did not understand the concept of fantasy. In that, if I'm having a hamburger, I'm not going to fantasize about a steak. If I want a steak, I'm just going to go get one. So, what was this fantasy thing? And the more she explained it, the less I understood it. Until finally, one day we mutually agreed, which is kind of interesting, remembering she worked for me.
Right, yes.
That she was just going to put this fantasy into action. And the fantasy, remembering the era, because we're talking about 73, 74, 75, in the whole era of blaxploitation movies. Her fantasy was to be a pimp, not a clue. Not clue one. She explained this. Okay, the explanation made sense. What has that got to do with you? And things kind of happened. Now, I identify as a lesbian, but I also need to explain Jill was my first, Jill is my last.
Oh, that's beautiful. Oh my goodness.
When Jill and I met, I was engaged to be married to my childhood sweetheart. So it begins to kind of show you how far Jill Carter, aka Dr. Frankenstein, took this monster. Because in following my husband's craziness, and that is how I refer to Jill, because some would argue that our marriage looks more like something out of the 50s. In following my husband's craziness, or at the time, in following my employee's craziness, we fell in love. And I found it incredibly confusing because, hi, I'm engaged to be married. We're running off to my mom and said, Mom, I think I have a problem. I'm falling in love with a woman. And she looked at me and said, that's nice, dear, but what's your problem? And I was convinced she hadn't heard me properly. So I repeated this, I'm falling in love with a woman. And she said, that's nice, dear. When do I get to meet her? Now, there was a little more. She talked about love being like the brass ring on a merry-go-round, and you better reach for it when it comes. They met. After their first conversation, she stood up and said, I have two daughters now, and that was the end of the conversation. And then the rest of it was sort of following Jill's crazy fantasies. And some of them for the time were a tad bit unconventional. And the more I followed along with the person who would become my partner, the deeper into this craziness we got, not realizing that there was anyone else who was doing it. Now, both of us having come from rather interesting religious backgrounds, we're convinced we were going to hell in a flaming handbasket. But Jill said there have to be other people who do this. We cannot be the only ones. So off we went to an adult bookstore. I'm not going to tell you how far away it was from where we were, since we were both teachers at the time, and most New Jersey teachers have morals clauses in their contracts. We went way far away to find this bookstore. Walked in, found a couple of treasures, mostly newspapers, grabbed them, ran. Got back, read them. In the back of one was an advertisement that changed our lives. It was a 1 column inch by 1 inch advertisement that said masochist, lonely, basically come to. We did. The address was for a brand new group called Eulenspiegel. You would know it as Tess. We walked into our first meeting. There was an incredible Black man staring at us because the group was facing him. He could see the door. And he said, quote, "Come in, little sisters, you're home," close quote. And we joined Tess. We were home. And
Mhm.
the rest of it has been written about. But Dr. Frankenstein and Frankenstein's monster have been active in this thing we do ever since.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. That's an amazing story. Oh my goodness.
You know, there is more to it. I was foolish enough to obey, i.e., keep a journal. And then I was crazy enough to let about 35,000 of my closest friends read it one day because I was silly enough to allow it to be published. I didn't think anybody would read it. Boy, was I wrong.
Oh my goodness. So how was I have to ask, how was so this is not even on my list of questions, but that was so much there. How was the community back then in the 1970s, 1975? How was that? Like
Small.
that's when I was born, 1975.
Thanks for that. Uh, really, it was smaller, Shaw. It was intimate. Think of the beginning of any family. It
Mm,
grows exponentially as the children, so to speak, are born. Well, other generations are the same thing. Each generation gets a little bigger and a little bigger. But back in the day, and Jill and I are tri-state babies, New
mm,
York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, upward to Connecticut. It was a very new thing in public. And
mm,
that's what I have to qualify there. Were there house parties? Yes, they've been going on, come on, since the 20s. Were there private clubs? Yes. But the concept of what we do in public, i.e., Eulenspiegel, and
mm,
on the West Coast, the very new Society of Janus, the ability to publicly gather was new. And it was scary, don't get me wrong,
ah,
because what we were talking about was technically illegal, and in some states still is, as well as the right to gather discussing this kind of information.
mm,
We were a young family, basically, united by our kink. We were eager to learn, eager to know we weren't alone, which is, of all the things that have happened over the years, when members of this community or people who discover their kink in quiet and then believe they're the only ones who could be doing this,
mm,
find out they're not alone. And in many ways, they never have been, is a revelation, a revolution, a huge sigh of relief,
mm, yes.
all at the same time. There are others like me. And that's what a man named Pat Bond and a few others did when they founded Eulenspiegel. They went looking publicly for others like them.
Mm.
And the two became 10, four. Marty and a few others who joined Pat, the four became 20 pretty quickly. And now Eulenspiegel Tess is all over the world and has had offshoots that now make 20, a couple of million.
Mm. Yeah. By the way, I'm from the Bronx, the Boogie Down Bronx. So, yeah.
So now it's open, it's easy, it's a wealth of information, some good, some not, but a wealth of information that wasn't around when I was a kinkling. Um, you learned from one person who deemed you ready to teach it, and then you taught others. But we were awfully close knit. We had to be.
Mm. Was there a lot of like the community that I'm in right now? There's not a lot of POC with where I'm at in Jacksonville, Florida. How was that in New York, New Jersey area?
I need to back you up again, backing up to the 70s. When in those early groups, we were far more excited to be kinky than we were worrying about color.
Oh.
Now, when Jill and I first walked in to Orange Beagle, the man who greeted us was handsome and black. So, in the clarity of hindsight, the first face that welcomed us looked like us.
Yeah.
Now, as it turned out, as we got more and more involved with this great family of kink, and I had the privilege to travel. Jill was the more quiet one because she had the corporate job. I was the one with the collar around my neck who was told to serve this thing that we do. Now, as I went to club runs and was privileged to be in the right place at the right time to learn a lot of the people and get to know them who actually did the hardest work in this tribe. At one event where I realized there were 400 people in that room. I knew all of them. We had gathered from different locations and events. We gathered for a family reunion called Living in Leather, which really was the first of its kind. Now we have events every weekend, but Lil, or Living in Leather, was first. I knew everybody in that room. And there was revelation that there were 400 people in that room and me.
Mm.
And it was the first time I ever realized that I was in a crowd of people and I was lonely. Because where were the people who would understand the cultural references? Where were the people who might understand slang that I could throw out? Where were the people who understood that on Sunday when we had closing plenaries, I was more likely to come downstairs humming gospel than I was the local pop tune. And it was an interesting revelation because it was years down the road when Jill and I were kinklings. The color didn't really matter because there were so few of us. And what did matter was, are you kinky? Are you twisted? Are you a pervert? What you doing? What equipment are you using? How can we help each other?
Yes.
It wasn't until the family got bigger, this great family of kink, that the revelation of one of the few people we call daddy, and there were actually three, two men who we revere, Tom and Jerry, who took us under their wing, and Jack Jackson. But the face that greeted us was black. I look at one black face in the mirror, I sleep with one, and the only other one that was out publicly, or two actually, one was Mistress Martha Gibb in Chicago, and the other was Mistress Mir in Denver at the time. Now, that ain't a whole lot considering the size of this tribe.
Yeah.
Has it changed? Yeah. Did Jill and I think back then about the fact that we were standard bearers for other young men and women of color? Not really. Did we come to that realization? Yes. Now, were there other Black faces in kink? Yes, they were private. The chief who ran the Obia Society and put out a magazine, by the way, called Obia. But they were very closed groups. Were we members? Yes. Was it open to the public? No. So those who were actually seeking went to the groups they could find. And there weren't a whole lot of faces back then. Since you're stuck with a storyteller. Jill and I have moved around. They're corporate moves. We ended up taking our first move together to the West Coast. And at a street fair in Santa Monica, pretty common, up Santa Monica Boulevard in the Silver Lake district. There were probably 3,000 or 4,000 people there, classic craft fair, a lot of fun. A few rides and food vendors and all of that. There was an incredibly handsome young Black man, easily 100 yards away from me, bare-chested, wearing double leather armbands. And I happened to have been in my club vest at that time, from the Lesbian Sex Mafia, LSM. We gravitated through that crowd just to hug each other. Now, as it turned out, that man, his name was D. Cannon.
And you didn't know him? You didn't know him at the time?
We didn't know each other.
Huh.
It was seeing another Black face, and he could see the leather on my shoulders from seeing the top of my vest. And I could easily see his armbands, which was pretty easy since he had a chest like a Greek god. And we wove our way through that crowd just to hug each other.
Oh my goodness.
Now, Dee went on to become the second Black international Mr. Leather. But that's what it was like back then. When you saw another Black face in leather, you found each other. When you saw another, and I shouldn't say Black because that's not entirely accurate, when you saw another non-white face in leather, you found each other. Because there were so few of us, it's like, hey, who are you? Where you come from? What you doing? Want to have a cup of coffee? Because we were that rare at the time.
That's beautiful. I love that. Because I feel like nowadays, I want to do that now. You know what I'm saying? I see someone else that looks like me. I want to high five them. I want to give them a hug. So, wow, that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
A lot of things have come out of that need to find us, that innate need to find us. An organization, an event called Blackbeat, founded by 3 Black women just to have a conference for other folk of color. The Men of Onyx, or I should now say the Onyx movement, because it's not just the Men of Onyx. Other magazines, Black Leather in Color, which has now been revived to the delight of the one founder that's still alive. The Onyx Pearls, hopefully soon to be formed Onyx X, or those who identify as non-gender conforming. April, Asian and Pacific Islanders. There is a new group coming up, from what I've been told, that is just representing First Nation. We have our first Asian IMSL and Boot Black together. Many know Goddess Indigo, but they don't realize that while her father is African American, her mother's Korean. And so there are many where originally there were only a few.
Times are changing in a good
For the
way.
better.
Yeah. Wow. So much there. Thank you. So let me ask you, with where you're at right now and telling this story of how it all began, how you got here, I like to know, like, did you, like, after a while when you started like finding your groove, did you have an idea or a vision of where you wanted to end up at? Was this your vision? Did you think you were going
To lie to you and say, of course it was.
to?
But it wasn't. Now, first things first, my life has been an amazing series of almost unbelievable coincidences that have all gotten together to create me. But the beginning of this actually happened in a room, in a closet, not in the conventional way. The person that I was serving had one closet in the room they used. It was basically a kind of she shed, but it was also the bedroom. Now, the closet was locked to keep it away from the children, although they knew where the key was and they were reading more of mom and dad's porn than mom and dad ever realized. But one day I, opened the closet to get a book to read before bed. And the book I wanted to read was Psychopathia Sexualis. Long story. If you haven't read it, you should. It's great one-handed reading. Originally written 1897, I think.
Oh, wow.
And I picked up the book and I sat down and I opened the boards and the book fell apart. Literally, it crumbled to termite dust. So I put it down. I got another book. It happened to have been another fairly rare book because the couple that I was in service to, the man had been around since before John Willie, and that's a name that may or may not make sense to you. So I picked up the 47 Sylvan. There are only 1,500 copies of that book in existence for that publication. Each of those books was numbered. I picked up the book fell apart. I started picking up books in the rare book section. His little section, there were probably about 40 books there that were all either limited editions, rare printings, or old. Every one of them I picked up, turned to termite dust. And I had a screaming fit. I had a screaming, crying fit, actually. I got on the horn with a friend of mine, a name that you may or may not know in this tribe, a woman named Gail Rubin. You may know her as Dr. Gail Rubin. She is this tribe's #1 cultural anthropologist, and has written extensively about what it is that we do, as well as written on a lot of things dealing with gender issues and women's rights. So I am in the phone, Gail, because she also was a great preserver of history, and I am having a crying fit about this pile of termite dust that is on the floor sitting between my legs. Gail, calm me down.
Yeah, I can't even imagine that.
I'm coming down from San Francisco to LA this weekend. I'm going to speak to the couple that owns this collection about what we can do to preserve it, and I'm going to go through the collection myself. It freaked me out because here was all of this valuable history I wanted to read. And it was just a bundle of termite food. And if this collection looked like that, who else had collections like this? And what were they doing about it? So Jill and I started saving the little things that we were given. And in clarity of hindsight, had I known better, I would have started 20 years before that when we first came out. But, it's the 80s now. I didn't know any better. So we started saving the programs and the books we had been given. magazines and things like that fade out. We ended up on another corporate move, and we moved from Los Angeles to Tulsa, Oklahoma, or technically Tulsa's suburb. And Tulsa was an interesting community because when we moved there in the late 80s, it was just rebuilding itself from the first wave of AIDS. Remembering that AIDS hit the East Coast, then the West Coast before it hit the Midwest. So most of the leather folk, predominantly men at that time, had either died or had run home scared and weren't talking to people because remember when I came out, AIDS was death. It wasn't an inconvenience. You got a diagnosis, you were dead, period. The question was, were you dead in 5 days or were you dead in 10 weeks? But it was death sentence. So a new generation of kinklings was coming out. And they were looking, A, for each other, and then B, looking for teachers, and there just weren't any. So Jill and I moved, and again, fate, one of those ridiculous coincidences. The moving truck arrived on a Monday. By Thursday, I was feeling claustrophobic. My husband was off on another assignment. I think they had shipped her out to do something. And so I'm unpacking boxes with a friend who had come out with us to help us with the move. And I said, I'm getting out of here. I need a new pair of boots. Let's go down to this big Western store and go shopping. As it turned out, the young man who was fitting me for a pair of boots was kinky.
Of course.
Made him blush because he was wearing a red hanky, and I said, cowboy, where I come from, that red hanky means something. Now, when he turned bright red, I realized he knew what I was talking about. We started talking, and he said, in a couple of days, in downtown Tulsa at a bar called Renegades, there's going to be a meeting of people who are interested in forming a leather club. Why don't you come? That was the meeting that created TULSA. Remember, I said, fate has put me in weird places.
Yes.
Did I mean to be a charter member of Tulsa? No, fate put us there. All right. So the kinklings also found out about the meeting from as far away as Oklahoma City. And they were there and attached and looking for someone who would teach them. They were looking for the equivalent of leather parents. They ended up in Jill's and my living room every weekend, pulling out the few boxes of stuff that we had saved. They were constantly asking questions, and the answer was usually, go look in the box. Until they made us realize that our old stuff was actually their history. Revelation number 1. Okay, it's more than just me saving my personal history. I'm saving it for them as well. Now, remember, I was the one who could travel. And since I was living in Oklahoma, because we had just moved, but I was still serving in California and loved to drive. More often than not, I was driving instead of flying. So I'd come back with the latest issue of the Leather Journal, which was just forming back then, or whatever new magazines may have come in from Europe, or programs from an event. Even now, don't put a program down around me because I will pick it up and keep it. 3 or 4 copies of something, or a T-shirt from an event from my club president, etc. And that collection grew and grew. Did I mention it grew? But it also got to the point where other clubs in the area were going, Mama Vi, can you bring some of that stuff? We're having a meeting. Can you bring? Okay. Ended up moving to Philadelphia, or the Philadelphia area, I should say. And those few boxes had become a lot of boxes. Enough for me to have to actually hide them so Jill wasn't tripping on the boxes. Uh,
I know we're getting to the library soon here. Mm-hmm.
She came home one day while I was doing some rearranging, tripped over a box and said, "Get your ass to a storage unit," which I did.
That bad, huh?
One of my other sons has walked in. You would probably know him, and he's over here giggling while I'm talking. As a matter of fact, you probably know Pulse. He's sitting over here laughing his ass off.
Oh, hi, Pulse.
He's heard a lot of this and has been with me for 20 years of this evolution. But anyway, so I took my tush to a storage unit, got one, was actually kind of surprised once I moved all the boxes out of the house at how many of them there actually were. Doing a class presentation actually called Leather History Show and Tell, where I drag around a box of books and tell stories very much like we're doing now. Tell stories about the things in the box and how they affected my kinkling years. A man named Scott Parker said, "I've taken this class 5 times. I've never seen the same thing twice. How much of this do you own?" I actually had to think about that. And he said he and his wife were doing a first ever event in South Carolina. And would I bring it all? And said he would give me a room and would I set it all up?
Oh.
Sure, what the heck? Could be fun. I did. I was surprised, actually, once it was all out, at how much of it there really was. But we were all surprised at how many people were in that room over the weekend. Okay. So this crazy collection was becoming that thing that grandmom or mom did. The third piece of the puzzle, the newly formed eBay was still very open and we could all talk to each other back in the day. eBay restricts that now. And a whole lot of wonderful treasures were coming across eBay. That was the nature of personal trading, far less commercial as it is now. A book came up for sale that I wanted for the presentation, but I had something most people didn't have. The little town we lived in, Willow Grove, which is Philly's northern suburb, was one of the first towns Comcast wired for the high-speed cable. So I had a button that was a whole lot faster than most people. Book came up for sale. I won the book. The guy that I beat out for the book and I started basically wiring back and forth. I thought he was, a buyer of erotica who could help me find stuff. He thought I was a book burner, like he was. And I need you to understand the impact of that. Now, I grew up in a house where my mother's library was extensive. Reading was a given. Books were sacred, the good and the bad. Books were sacred. You don't burn books.
So he was buying books to burn them?
And being paid to buy them to burn them. And was not the only one. You need to understand that. Now, fade out. Month and a half, maybe 2 months later, I was down in Atlanta for an event called Southeast Leather Fest, an event that I was attending every year. I was attending it before it was Southeast Leather Fest. That's how long my history went back with that. And a young man asked if he could talk to me. Sure, figuring it was contest stuff. As it turned out, he had a little new age shop in Michigan, and there had been a book burning in front of his store. And he was afraid for his clients. A little live action role play in the back, crystals, comics, new age. But he was scared to death that they were going to target the people who he serviced, basically. Talked him out of closing the store. Went upstairs to my hotel room. had a screaming match with God. That day I swore that my hobby was going to become the library, because you don't get to burn it on my watch. This is who we are. But from a history teacher's perspective, because that's what I did, although now I'm teaching history to my tribe instead of in the public high schools. A number of great philosophers before me have said, if I can destroy your history, I will destroy you. Because the people who come after you will never know you existed. Destroying that level of culture can not only destroy a people as a group, it can destroy an individual. Because if you truly believe you're alone and there's something wrong with you, not knowing that there are others like you and what you have discovered is normal, you may kill yourself in the loneliness. Think of how many of our LGBTQ youth, especially in youth, get bullied into believing they're sick. You're fine, boy. I've got the history to prove that what you do, how you have discovered your sexuality, goes back so far history can't even chart it. You're fine. But if the proof of that is destroyed, what is that kid going to think? Are the people who are bullying me right? Am I really sick? Am I demented? Is there something wrong with me? Should I even be on this earth? You don't get to do that on my watch. And I have been fortunate enough that my extended family is as crazy as I am and supports this thing that the family does. And now, as it has grown exponentially, and far more so than I ever realized, the community has come to, they appreciate their treasures. And are exploring history. And now we have young artists who are coming in. We're working on our second artist in residence. Our first has shined. We have scholars in residence who are part of the Carter Johnson family. We're setting up gardens for the community to have weddings in and hand fastings and to bring rocks to preserve memories. And that's a whole different story. But it all happened because fate. You know, those three women have a great sense of humor, since according to the Greeks, there are three fates. It's put Jill and me in the right place at the right time to bear witness to history. The word disciple has way too many religious connotations. And the reality is, it just means to bear witness. See, the sun just brought the great elixir of life.
What is that? What is that?
It's coffee. That which runs the world, baby, coffee. And I am a coffee junkie, but that's a whole different story. Disciple means to bear witness. And that's all it means. You have seen something that history has determined is important. But there's an obligation with that word that most people forget about. When you have borne witness to something, you also have an obligation to share it. Did I help to create the National Leather Association? No. But I was there knowing the people who did it. And I tell their story. Did I write the statement of purpose for that organization? No. But I was sitting at the feet of the people who did. Did I found Black Leather in Color? No, that was for amazing friends. But did I write for it? Yes. Did I know them? Yes. Was I there when Baroness Monique Von Cleef was busted in 1964? And that's a whole long story. No. Was she grandmom to my leather family? Yes. I have an obligation to tell her story. Am I the great writer Gail Rubin is? No. Is she a friend? Yes. I'm obligated to tell her story. That's what disciple means. And because of all of the amazing circumstances, situations, and people who have been a part of Jill's and my life, we have experiences with them, souvenirs from them, books written by them. Did we do any of it? No. Did we save it? Yes.
It sounds like coffee. It sounds like to me when we talked about originally, we were talking about doing things and following your bliss because you love it. And it sounds like from that story, your love of history, your love of learning, your love of books, and your obligation to feel that when you get information, you're obligated to share it is a part of your why.
Yeah. The biggest part. Now, I want to come back to something we talked about before you turned on that recording.
Yes.
Why you are so important to me.
Mm.
Once upon a time, let's go back to Jack Jackson. And I had told you that there were 3 men who were part of Jill's and my leather past. Jack was one. The other 2 were a couple named Tom and Jerry McNichol, master and slave. The slave, Jerry, became mentor to me. Now, ultimately, both of them had to move to Chicago and died in the second wave of AIDS. Jerry left me with a debt. He said, when you have done for someone else what you think I've done for you, your debt to me is paid. Until then, you owe me. Now, how do I repay the man who made me content to look at the woman in the mirror?
Mm.
When you have done for someone else what you think I've done for you, your debt to me is paid. How do I pay that debt except through you?
Mm.
That one's real simple. When I said thank you, I meant it.
Wow. I feel that.
How am I going to guarantee that everything that was given to me, that everything that I love, that everything that has made me who I am goes on, except to encourage the next generation to keep on keeping on?
And you do that. And you have done that for me just by being here, just agreeing to be here and meet with me and talk with me and share your stories. Thank you. So let's go on to some fun questions. Yes. Okay. So I know we're running out of time. So fun questions. I want to know. So first question is cats. I saw that you had pictures of tigers. You said you love cats. What is the story about around cats and your affinity with cats? I say this because I like,
That one?
yeah, and you had some other ones. You were holding baby tigers.
Those are lions.
Oh, those are lions?
Lions are born striped. Lions are born with spots. The spot is in their skin, not in their fur. So when the fur actually grows out, the spots disappear, but they're still there.
Oh,
But it's
okay.
not just cats, it's also wolves and ferrets and raccoons and skunks. And
Okay.
I love animals. And remembering again, weird positions, fate, sense of humor. And there's a reason why I think it's a Chicago Eagle, there's a sign that said no tigers allowed in the bar. Um, the young man who owns that pussycat, or who owned because he's deceased now, was a man named Roger Fig. Young Leatherman, who was also a wild animal trainer and had come from a long line of wild animal trainers. It's what his parents did and so on. That pussycat is a liger. She's a lion tiger hybrid and was his pet.
Oh, wow.
Her name is Fire, technically Ms. Fire. And when Fire was a kid, Roger took her everywhere with him into bars. They actually did shows together. They did classroom lectures together, talking about endangered species and so on. Well, Roger and I met at a Living in Leather, and Fire was with him, which is the fastest way to guarantee nobody's either coming near you or, some are fascinated and going, he's crazy, but the cat's pretty. And much to his surprise, Fire walked up to me and acted like most kittens do. She began to rub. And I have no fear because I'm too daggone stupid. And I simply, got down on the floor and started playing with the cat, who then proceeded to remember that she is still a cat and rolled over and did the belly thing. And okay, at the time she was a baby, she was only about 150 pounds.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, come on, I've had dogs bigger than that. And we kind of bonded.
Oh,
When Mistress Mira and I did Pantheon, one of the Pantheons in New Orleans, Roger was going to be doing a show with her. And we had to be outside babysitting Fire because he couldn't bring her into the theater as to just sit. He could only come and go through the stage door, and we had to babysit her because Fire is afraid of horses. And somebody had to protect her from the big bad horse. So I knew who Fire's breeder was because she was in Oklahoma, and at the same time, so were Jill and I. So I ended up going down to help her babysit cats, or when Roger was adding extra cats or training them for other exhibits and things like that. Half the time they ended up in my living room or in my backyard or following me around with a bottle. Solomon and Sheba, who are the two you have seen pictures of, are lion cubs, and used to think that I was their favorite climbing tree. And usually when they got to about here, they started pawing with each other to see who could knock the other off. And hi, I'm the monkey in the middle.
Oh my goodness.
So it wasn't that uncommon to have, a couple of wolf cubs or, well, my pet raccoons were a whole different story. But a couple of wolf cubs or some weird ass hybrid cat, especially when we were in Oklahoma. So now that picture was taken because Mistress Mira was doing a photo shoot for a designer whose clothes she wore a lot. And she wanted to add an exotic element. So Roger said, how about we bring Fire? The pictures are stunning. And then getting Fire, and they were taken all over her incredibly gorgeous home. But Roger had the bright idea to bring Fire downstairs to Mistress Mira's dungeon, which at the time was considered one of the most gorgeous in the world. And once we got her downstairs, looking at this from a cat or a kitten's perspective, because Fire was still a baby by tiger standards, you go into a playroom and you got a whole lot of dangly things.
Right. Mm-hmm.
It literally was like turning a kitten loose at Petco.
Yeah.
Anything that dangled, she was swatting, including the whips, the masks, all of the things that could have been hanging off a wall. It was one of the funniest things to watch I think I have ever seen, until she finally settled down and started to pose. And then you got all the problems you have with any animal. Eventually she's got to go outside and pee. Nothing can freak out your neighbors more than, your neighbor walking at that point about 240 pounds of what looks like a Siberian tiger. Welcome to my life.
That is so cool. I had to ask about that because I love cats too. So I'm very jealous. My favorite cat is a cheetah. And I've always said that I'm a reincarnate of Josephine Baker because, she always had her cheetah with her. And I even have a tattoo with a cheetah on it. I don't know if you can see that.
Ink is gorgeous. Who did your work?
Someone in Atlanta by the name of Ricky. But yeah,
Gorgeous.
thank you. So yeah, I've got the warrior there. But yeah. So last question, Mama Vi. Let me bring this up because the way I have this question written out, I want to make sure I get it here. I understand that you had an encounter with a vampire as a teenager. Do you mind telling us how you became a vampire and if you think that your vampiric spirit is what gives you the immortal prowess to kick ass and take names?
Kick ass and take names part has been part of my personality all the time. As I have said, don't mistake my choice to serve with the assumption that I am submissive. Submission and dominance are personality traits. Service is my choice. And if you mix up the two, you might be in for a pretty rude surprise, as a number of dominants have found out. But coming back to my crazy youth, and this is a whole different discussion, so we're going to make a long story real short.
Okay.
In the house and family that I grew up in, strange people in and out of the house were common. My mother was a retired artist. I grew up in a family of ministers, rabbis, singers, musicians. So all of the people who would be part of that artsy fartsy set were constantly in and out of the house. Artists, opera singers, jazz singers, occasional black mafia. It was common. One of my mother's good friends, who was also a butterfly collector, was very much into an organization called the Golden Dawn. It has other names that it's known by now. And he was sanguine. He was a blood drinker. And talked about the sanctity of blood, the spiritual bonding of blood, the intimacy of blood. And the stories of vampire mythology were part of my youth. I heard them as bedtime stories, right along with Noah and all of the other Greek myths, all of that. It was part of my childhood. Alan asked me whether or not I would like to share his. I didn't realize that he had already had this conversation with my mother, and my mother said it was my choice. I did. It was very simple. I did. It's an amazing experience. It would take far longer to explain than this little Zoom has time for. As a matter of fact, that's a conversation we will have over a cup of coffee one day when we're together.
I would love that.
It is an intimacy that is far more than mere sex, because you have a little bit of someone else literally coursing through your bloodstream, not just in a certain part of your body.
Right.
Blood is bonded. There's a reason why we talk about blood brothers. And it's more than just the bonding of blood shed in battle. There is a reason why great civilizations through history have consumed the blood of their enemies. It is an honor in many of those societies because you want that warrior's blood within you. There is a lot more to it in most great civilizations. And sharing in that ritual, that particular part of culture, that mythos, as well as that intimacy, that is part of what we rather casually call vampire culture. There are much better ways of putting it. But share it, because that's an overall catch-all term that is like lumping all First Nation and just saying Indian. But there is a level of intimacy that connects you in ways you don't really think about until you begin to be sanguine and stay that way. It awakens its own hungers. It awakens its own needs. Yes, it is addicting. And yes, it can be called an extreme blood fetish. And yeah, it can, if you are willing to share blood, you may be willing to share other things, including the willingness to let natural instincts run without fear and without putting certain things on leashes. We tend to forget that we are not above our animal brothers, we're animals.
Wow. We got to talk, Mama Vibe. Got to talk. So, thank you.
Let's a cup of coffee together.
A cup of coffee. So, in closing, is there anything else that you would like to share, or just how can others find you?
Finding me is not all that difficult. If you scream loud enough anywhere, somebody will find me. They'll either find me on Facebook, occasionally on FET. I'm not on FET as often. As funny as this is going to sound, the white print on the black page can trigger a migraine in me. So I have a number of my kids monitoring FET, and then they send me the letters that I need to go and answer. I'm more likely to be on Facebook. Way too much social media can also make old people crazy. People tend to forget there's a lot of gray hair up there for a reason. But they can find me on FET. They can write me personally. Half the known universe has my phone number. I'm not that difficult to get a hold of.
Okay. All right.
Or, as I am reminded by my youngin over here, or through the library webpage.
It's so funny. When I heard him, I looked over to the side, like I could see him. Oh, who's that? Awesome. Well, thank you, thank you, thank you. It's been absolutely amazing. Such a pleasure. And I don't know how many times I'm going to re-listen to this video over and over and over again. You dropped so much jewels, and